Which I think is I really think that's young. Well, it's weird. I coach my younger coach you're never out of the view of spectators. But it is because you longer practice. Four by one, 4x2, 4x4. Four by one, first or tip the straight, or check. 4x2, you run 4x4 is the starting one. That's a straight. So you got the guitar. Right. Yeah. We got to do that. Good morning. I'm Bill Miller.
Bill Miller.
Yeah.
Susan Bond.
I'm sorry.
I'm Susan Bond.
Susan, nice to meet you. Jim? I know. You cool up in here? Woman up in here?
We met,
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Were y'all kidding?
Yeah, we
Yeah, I think it was this.
I know. You shouldn't go one. I almost, well, yeah, he's right.
I didn't hear all that.
What?
I didn't hear that one.
He, I think he just stayed at the family house.
I got
Most travel.
He's,
you done pretty good? You done pretty good?
yes, and I was here.
That's good for supply week, so you're right.
Like, I knew.
I'm going to keep
Hey, I heard you. Yeah. No, I know what you're doing. I get it. Pretty eyelashes, that natural. Oklahoma City.
out there in no, the city's cool. Some of the drive in through Arkansas and stuff.
Yeah, no kidding.
Full lake.
drive across the west side between Phoenix and Dallas.
Just not much. I've never even got to just go to Arizona. I definitely want to do that with some point.
No, I'll drive by 10 from Dallas to Phoenix. The speed limit is 18 on the line. Cruise on forever.
Yeah, luckily, I'm going to do like 2.5 hours from Dallas, so I got a couple of friends from Dallas, so I get to go down there a little bit. Maybe we can like a golf trip to Arizona or something.
Living mountains. I thought when Ryan was telling me
Hey,
about
I almost ordered that same shirt, but in Oregon.
You really?
Yeah, because the company that makes that shirt will do different logos. I love that shirt.
Yeah, I don't get to wear it too often.
I know, you noticed I have my favorite tie on today.
The Civil War?
Yeah. Although I have not been alive the last time that they played against Oregon State in September. It's weird.
I just have to eat the game.
I sure hope so too. Yeah, it was weird watching football yesterday. I'm watching UCLA versus Indiana at the Rose Bowl, and it's a conference game. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All weird.
All right.
All weird.
Very strange. Very strange. Yeah, it was. Who did UCF play? It's like UCF also played. It was like. Okay. Yeah, I'm watching UCF and TCU, and this is a Big 12 conference game.
The game did.
It's like sure. All right, we're gonna say that's a Big 12 game. Okay.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Good to see you today. We're going to go to lesson 3. That's page 15 in our material. Page 15. Every joint supplies something. And today's lesson is going to be all about the things that we all can do. Because admittedly, not everybody is comfortable teaching, and that's fine. And James chapter 3 even says not everybody should be a teacher. I mean, you're going to incur a stricter judgment. And whatever that means, I know there's different takes on like what really is involved in incurring a stricter judgment as a teacher. The warning still remains. Not everybody should be a teacher. Not everybody wants to be. Not everybody is capable. Not everybody's qualified. And that's okay. But just because you're not like teaching a Bible study doesn't mean there isn't something that we all need to be doing when it comes to supporting evangelistic efforts in our congregation. So let's start off with a word of prayer. Preston, I didn't ask you in advance, but would you lead us in a prayer? Of course. Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you again today, thanking you again for us being here to openly fellowship with each other and learn about your word and just check on each other, Lord. We thank you for our safe travels here, and we thank you for another beautiful day today, and we thank you most of all for your Son. It's in His name that we pray.
Amen. Okay, so in your last couple of classes while I was gone, you took a look at John chapter 1 and the really cool pattern of evangelism that you saw there, the way that the disciples evangelized each other, basically, and their kind of first people that they talked to were their friends, their family members. Andrew talked to Peter, and there was a lot of excitement there, sharing the gospel of Jesus with his own brother. And so we're going to kind of pick up there with this quote at the top of page 15. I think it's a good segue from Jesus and his disciples in John 1 to, well, what's our challenge today? How do we take that and replicate it in our evangelism today? So I'll just read the quote just as a way of introduction to our lesson today. So the author from a book called The Church Challenged by Current Issues says, "The challenge today for the church to evangelize the world is indeed awesome, but it's no greater a challenge than Jesus gave to the first century disciples. Of a certainty, the world's population today is many times that of the first century, but we possess means of communication and transportation that enable us to do more work in less time. Also, of a certainty, many people in the world today are not receptive to the gospel. So was the case in the first century. The great challenge today is this." I like the way he puts it. It's like we think that our challenges are, there's just so many people out there. we think that the challenge is, oh, nobody wants to hear, nobody's interested. Well, those aren't the real challenges. The great challenge is this. Will each of us personally be the Lord's faithful servant? I love the way he frames it, because it's like, we always think the problem with personal evangelism is some outside thing, like, oh, people today aren't interested in the gospel. People today are not religious anymore. Just look at the rates in America of the average, rate of church going. How many Sundays a year do you go to church? Religious engagement, religious involvement, biblical knowledge, and we just think we're so up against it. But I think what this writer is saying is, no, actually the biggest obstacle to personal evangelism is me and my willingness to get out there and do it. That's the big obstacle. If you think things are hard today, it's not like it was any easier in the first century, because they just would swap out challenge for challenge. Like, oh, well, think about the first century, the challenges that Paul faced when he talked in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 about all the stuff that he went through. At least when we evangelize, I'm not being stoned and beaten and shipwrecked for it. And the worst that happened to me going to Iowa this last week was a really, really rough landing on Thursday afternoon. I kept waiting, by the way, in Chicago, thinking like, they're going to delay this flight. It's a hurricane. It's a Category 2 hurricane. They're going to delay this flight. And we just got to, and they're just like, all right, everybody, get on the plane. Like, are we sure? Are we really, really sure that we're doing this today? And the pilot gets on and says, this is your captain. No, we're going to encounter a little bit of weather as we get to Memphis, but I think it'll be okay. Okay. All right. Well, he's the one with the training, and if the computer model says go, then go. It was a really, really bad landing. I was not enjoying that at all. The mystique of flying has long passed for me in my grizzled old age of 41. But at least, like I said, with 2 Corinthians 11, at least we're not going like, yeah, we set up a booth at the Germantown Fest and we got stoned 3 times, and they set our booth on fire twice, and I still haven't seen Paige in 3 days. They kidnapped her and put her in prison. At least we don't say things like that. So I get it. Yeah, it's hard to evangelize. But let's just remember, there's always been the challenge. It's always been hard in its own unique way, whatever the environment is. But there's a set of bullet points here, there on page 15. What do we have? Instead of looking at it from a deficit perspective of why is it so hard, what is going against us, what do we not have, I would rather look at it from a more positive, saying, well, here's what I do have. So what do we have? Well, we have the truth, and let's never forget that. It's like I talked about from my lesson before. It's not about opinion. It's not about how smart I am. I can go into any room with anybody, no matter how intellectual they might be, and I might not be the smartest person in that room. In fact, I'm quite confident that I'm rarely the smartest person when I walk into a room. I probably could go to the daycare center at the YMCA, and I'm still not the smartest person in the room. Okay? But I have to remember that Jesus said, I am the way, and I am the truth. And no one comes to the Father but through how eloquent Ryan is, or how much Ryan knows, or how smart Ryan is. No. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. If that is true, then my confidence lies in Jesus, not in myself. So we have the truth, and that's valuable. We have God on our side. Romans chapter 8, verse 31. If God is for us, who's against us? If God is for us, then who is against us? Satan? I get that Satan is intimidating. Satan is not as powerful as God is, though. Something we need to remember is Satan is not omnipotent. Satan is not omniscient. Satan is not everywhere at all times. He's not God. We have God on our side. We have each other. We have each other. Don't take that for granted, by the way. And I've done a lot of meetings, and I've been associated with a lot of churches over the last 20 years, and there are churches that don't have the same resources that we do and the same expansive fellowship that we have, and we need to not take that for granted. We have each other. I was talking to someone just a few weeks ago, actually, about how when they were on vacation, we were talking about going on vacation and finding a church to worship with while you're on vacation. And this family was saying, we went to a church one time, and I don't remember where we were talking about, and they said they had 2 people. Two. It was two guys, just two men keeping the doors open. They were very excited to have visitors. I'll put it that way. They were very excited to have visitors that day. We don't have just two guys here. And that's we need to not take that for granted. We need to remember that when a person refuses to listen to the gospel, that person is rejecting God and not me. It is not my fault. If I have done what I need to be doing in offering the message, I need to not take it personally. God will take it personally for all of us. I mean that. God will take it personally for all of us. And I think God reassured the prophets a great deal. We studied the minor prophets last quarter, but I think God reassured the prophets a lot. Like, hey, listen, it's not your fault. Okay? Judah and Israel have been this way for a long time. They were rejecting me 800 years ago before you ever came along. Okay? So Amos, Joel, Jeremiah, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. They're mad at me. We need to remember that if someone rejects the gospel, they're rejecting God, not me. With that being said, what's the warning there? What do I need to make sure that I'm doing? What's kind of the warning? Like, if they're going to reject someone, they need to reject God, not me. What do I need to be doing to make sure that happens?
That you're presenting the gospel correctly.
Yes, that I'm presenting it correctly, that I'm not being a hypocrite, that I'm not being a jerk about it. Because if someone is going to reject the gospel, I want them to reject it because of the substance of that gospel, not because of me, the presenter. Because I was mean about it, or I was arrogant about it, or I refused to have an open mind myself, that I didn't communicate it properly. I need to make sure that it is the gospel someone's rejecting and not Ryan Goodwin that they're rejecting. And be very careful. Joe?
We don't need to automatically think just because they rejected it then that they're going to reject it forever, because again, we plant and we water, but it's in God's time. It may be much later down the road, but you planted the seed, years ago, anything happened, but that's exactly what did happen. And we don't need to automatically take it personally that they rejected me or God, because it takes time.
Yeah, it's like Nicodemus. From John chapter 3 to the end of the Gospel of John, that's about a 3-year period, right? And Nicodemus showed an evolution throughout the Gospel of John, from coming to Jesus at night with a lot of questions, going, I don't know if I understand what you're saying, to kind of timidly defending Jesus in the Sanhedrin Council, like, well, maybe we should hear him out before we judge him, to, I will go ahead and volunteer to take the body of Jesus. And that's a huge evolution for someone like Nicodemus, and that was a 3-year-long process. And so, just like with Nicodemus, maybe we plant, maybe in other waters, maybe it takes years on down the road for it to happen. My uncle, my mom's sister's husband, my uncle, he was not a Christian. He was a nothing, when they got married. And it took like 15 years of just consistent, loving messaging, essentially, living the gospel, and also a hurricane that destroyed their home. Forget about that. It is amazing how clear things become when you are in your kid's treehouse in the backyard, and the water is up to the roof line of your house. And it's very clarifying, like what your priorities are, and the way that the church in that area stepped up and practically rebuilt their home for them. That left a huge impression on him, and he did become a Christian. But that's years. That's years, decades maybe, of just consistent living and consistently hearing the message. And there are people who actually want the gospel, and let's never let those who reject it get us down. And finally, the job is really not that difficult. And you're going like, I think personal evangelism is really, really hard. Here's what I'm saying. God doesn't expect us to know everything all the time. God doesn't expect us to be Apollos, some eloquent person who knows everything about the scriptures. God doesn't expect us to be Paul the Apostle. God expects you to be you. And just whatever you can do in your area of influence, the people that you know. When it talks about in the Great Commission, go into all the world and preach the gospel, is he saying that, Alex, you must go literally into all the world and preach to all creation, you personally? Is that what he means by that? Or is that the mission that's given to the church for all time? Is that we have a responsibility to preach to our little corner of the world. And if the only thing that I can do is my little corner of the world, then I did my part of the Great Commission. And someone else is going to preach to their little corner of the world, and someone else is going to preach to their little corner of the world. And that's what the Great Commission is really about, is to go out into all the world, wherever it is that we have that opportunity to go into the world, our little slice of the world that I can influence. That's my job. Okay, any comments up to that point before I move on to this kind of next section? Yeah, Megan.
I think that we are like the Peters and the Pauls and the Apolloses, that we have strengths, things that we're really good at, but we have things that we're deeply flawed in.
Yeah.
And like the community that you were talking about, that's what fills in the gaps. Where Apollos is this eloquent speaker, he's really, really good at talking, but he doesn't have complete information.
Yeah.
So Priscilla and Aquila come, and maybe they're not very good speakers, but they can give him information, and now he can go use his gift. Peter was really bad about peer pressure. Yeah, that was a major flaw for him.
Yes, it was.
And Paul comes and supports him and like critiques him and criticizes him and helps him get through that flaw. Paul has his thorn in the flesh, whatever that was. And so each and every one of us has a talent, and I think that it's important for the community to point out what that talent is and also to support the flaws that each of us have.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's a really, really good point. All you need to do is read some of the concluding chapters to a lot of the letters that Paul wrote, and you get a sense of just the diverse array of people that it took to make up a community of Christians wherever it was. Like, I think Romans 16 is a very fascinating chapter. Even though we might read and go like, okay, greet this person, greet that person, say hi to that person, blah, blah, blah. And they're just a bunch of, like, Greek and Hebrew names that we don't use anymore. Like, but read that and read the descriptions of these people. He calls them their fellow servants. He calls them workers. He calls them, this person worked hard for you. He calls them fellow prisoners. He calls them kinsmen. He calls them beloved in the Lord. Everybody was really unique, and including Priscilla and Aquila, who he calls in verse 3, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus. Now, maybe they weren't out there like on a soapbox, eloquent preachers like Apollos was, but the fact that they had two skills that are so invaluable. One is the ability to one-on-one teach somebody. That was a skill that Priscilla and Aquila had. And two, the ability to practice hospitality, that the church was in their home. And so I think that's like, I might not be a great speaker. Hypothetical someone might not be a great public speaker. But maybe I'm really good at just sitting someone down and talking. Or maybe I'm just really good at letting them talk. Because we need listeners too, don't we? Rebecca always talks about one of her skills is, I can cry with people. That's one of her skills is, you need someone to cry with you. Rebecca, yeah, she got you. She can cry with you. Yeah. And that's one of her skills. And don't we need that? Don't we need those who can weep when others weep? And maybe I'm not very good at that. I'm not a crier. I'm not touchy-feely. I'm not a crier. And maybe that's not my skill. I can laugh when others laugh, but maybe I'm not as good at like weeping when others weeping. So again, that's a very astute observation that you look at Peter, James, John, Apollos, Priscilla, Aquila, Timothy, all of them may have had weaknesses, whether in a capacity of some kind or a physical limitation of some kind, and yet all the puzzle pieces still fit together when you do put them together. And that actually is a good segue into this next part where it does take a church. Like when it comes to personal evangelism, I think it's very true what we say about raising children, that it takes a village. I think it's very true of personal evangelism that it takes a church. Barry Kercheval said in a quote, when I speak of quote unquote saving a soul, and that's just nomenclature that we use a lot, is that we're trying to save souls. We're out there saving souls. When I speak of saving a soul, I am referring to a process that begins with the initial contact with an unbeliever and does not stop until years after the baptism into Christ. We're very bad at that sometimes. I'll be clear. We're bad at that sometimes. You know, it's like we're so excited about the get them baptized, and then we don't know what to do with people. We fail to integrate people into a community. We fail to teach people skills and get them to where they become contributors and workers within a Christian community. It does not stop until years after the baptism into Christ. Many Christians only see the baptism. They're unaware of the time and the effort spent patiently instructing, discussing, encouraging, and persuading. Further, Christians who are not involved in this process do not realize how difficult it is for a new convert to exchange their old carnal friends for new spiritual relationships. Most have forgotten the tough changes that must be made and the help needed for a new Christian to go from sin to righteousness. I think that's such a thoughtful thing that Barry is writing there, because especially for those of us who have, I don't know if it's a benefit or a crutch, but for those of us who grew up going to church, obnoxious finger quotes, please let's avoid the I don't want to write the whole thing out. It's too much writing. My handwriting's bad. Grow up in the church. Oh, I was raised in the church. I have to be very careful about that terminology, okay? You're not born into the church, okay? You might be raised going to church in the sense that church, ecclesia, means assembly, the gathering. So you're raised joining the gathering of Christians in a Christian community. That doesn't mean that you were raised in the church, but the advantage or the crutch that we sometimes have is that we don't really know what it's like to have to leave behind a sinful lifestyle. A deeply, deeply, deeply ingrained sinful lifestyle. All my friends are you. I don't have any other friends. I'm a very pathetic person socially. Was that an insult at you or me? Think about how that sounds. I don't, because I was raised going to church, because I've been a preacher for 20 years. I don't have coworkers. I don't have a lot of opportunities to cultivate strong relationships with people who are not Christians. So it's hard for me to be empathetic when I preach the gospel and say, leave your life of sin behind. Well, what does that mean? It means you've got friends who are still going to ask you to go sin with them on a Friday night. You've got people who are still, tendrils in your life that are still tugging at you, pulling at you, influencing you. I don't have to leave an entire social network to be right with God. But that unbeliever living in sin, they have to leave an entire social network. In some sense. I'm not saying abandon all. You understand what I mean, though. They have to leave an entire social network. They have to leave deeply held and ingrained behaviors behind. Are we patient enough that may take 10 years for them to figure that out? Are we okay? Are we okay kind of being understanding and sensitive about you can't change every single bad habit overnight just because you got baptized? Can we be patient with people as they're sort of working the kinks out of their moral life? That's really takes a lot of understanding. And I think maybe those of us who have been Christians for a long time, maybe don't always approach it as sensitively or thoughtfully as we ought to. You guys have any thoughts along those lines? Anything you want to add to that point? So along that lines of it takes a church, let's look at some of these bullet points starting at the bottom of page 15, and we'll turn the page here as we go. Saving people does take the cooperation of an entire church. It's if you're just relying on Lee and Ryan, that's what we pay the preachers for, and you're just depending on Lee and Ryan to just do everything, this church will not grow. I'm just going to say flat out, point blank, East Shelby will not grow if Ryan and Lee are doing all the work. Will not grow. Absolutely, 100% will not grow. Okay? So it does take an entire church of participation. And there's some scripture references there. Just for the sake of time, we won't kind of dwell upon that too much. Next bullet point, not only does a successful conversion require a teacher, but it also requires some other things. What are some things that you can do? And this is what these bullet points are. If you want to just steal a bullet point and make a comment on that's fine. But I want to open it up for beyond just Ryan teaching a class, what else do we need? What other involvement is required for really, really good personal evangelism in a church?
Warm bodies.
Okay, the people, warm bodies, yes. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like when I do these community Bible studies, I do them once a month on a Tuesday. We go to McAllister's Deli, and we do it on Meetup, so it's kind of advertised publicly. What's the best thing is just not being there alone. Having 6 or 7 or 8 other people, you don't have to do anything. Just come and be there, and it does bolster it. And things with like Meetup.com, there's an algorithm and all of that. And the more of you who join Meetup for free and say RSVP, sure, I'm going to go. The more active participation happens on a platform like that, the more that our Bible study gets pushed and promoted to people who are actively looking for things like Bible studies in their community. And like hitting RSVP or sure, I'll join Meetup.com for free and join the East Shelby Bible study group. That is a free, nothing you have to do beyond that, and it helps. Sharing something on Facebook, like that is like very little required there. When Ryan says, hey, this is what I preached on yesterday. Here's the YouTube link to my sermon from yesterday. Hitting share and saying, hey, Ryan had a great lesson yesterday. Love for you guys to hear this. Like, just put that on Facebook. That is an extremely easy, low commitment sort of thing that can be done. It just requires almost nothing from you, but it helps. What other stuff can we do? Like, what's some other stuff beyond the warm body sharing on Facebook? Let's take it like maybe one more step. What else do we need for good personal evangelism?
I think that evangelism is, you brought a person here to worship, and one thing we can do is all of us as members, we can seem like on fire for God and excited to be here.
Yeah.
Because if a visitor comes here and you can kind of see they're interested in questioning, and they're looking around, and during the singing and the sermon, the members here, we're just scrolling our phones, looking at Instagram and email.
Yeah.
We're not really on fire. Then it's like, why would I want to join this group?
Yeah.
We need to kind of model that we are on fire to serve the Lord. And I think that would rub off on them.
That's great. So it's like, that's a passive way that we can do evangelism. I'm not evangelizing by worshiping really, really excitedly, but that's kind of a passive form of evangelism, isn't it? That people will see my life and my fire for God. And I know I sing loud. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but I like to sit right in the middle of the auditorium, and I sing really, really loud because I just feel like the louder I sing, maybe it will make someone else more comfortable to sing out a little bit more also. Maybe if you can hide behind me while I sing really loud, that's fine. Or if my enthusiasm rubs off on someone else, then that's great. But I want people to know that I am excited to be here, and I am excited to sing even songs that I don't like. Like maybe I don't like a song, and there's plenty of songs I don't like. I don't like the tune or whatever. I'm still going to sing with a lot of excitement because it's not about me, it's about God. I want people to see that. I want people to see that I'm excited. Maybe that rests a lot on song leaders as well. In terms of how excitedly are you leading the song? Are you putting the effort into putting some thought into it the night before or on Friday or whatever? Are you putting some real thought into, I'm going to have a theme? Drew does a great job with this. I don't mean to call you out, but I do mean to call you out. Drew always does a good job because he picks songs of a theme and then he explains what it is. He doesn't leave it so it's like kind of enigmatic, like, I have a theme today, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. And we're all like, was it Jesus? But every song he says, this is why I picked this. It's just 15 seconds of, this is why I picked this, because there's a line here in verse 3 that says this, and it connects, to everything. And so are we all putting in just that kind of level of thought into our worship? So Jacob, I think that's a very good comment, that how I worship, that's not direct evangelism, but it is going to either help or hinder our evangelism. Kind of impression that we make. What else? What else can I be doing? What else can you be doing to help with evangelism? Alex?
When we first started coming here, before we were baptized and members, people would invite us to their houses all the time for dinner and Bible studies and stuff, and I felt like that was eye-opening because just everybody wanting us to come to their house, inviting us, and I felt like that was always a good show.
It reinforces the message that we're preaching.
Yeah.
Right?
In the love that people showed.
Yeah. Yeah, it just reinforces that. I think that's very, very valuable. It's a good comment, Alex. and again, I think maybe we sort of take that for granted. Like if I already feel good about like my place socially in East Shelby, like I've got friends and I do lunch with people and we go out, whatever. I don't always think about like how hard it would be to be like a stranger walking into a room of 250 people. They all know each other. They've all got inside jokes and they're laughing and everything. And I'm a complete stranger. And the proposition is to become a part of this community somehow. Like I sometimes don't realize how hard that would be for somebody.
They made it easy. I mean, when we first came, I mean, it was 12 years ago, something like that. I mean, everybody here was glad to see us. I mean, they didn't know us, but they were striking up conversations like we've known them for years. Yeah. It made it easy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Gina?
The lady that I brought, a brief day that's been coming back, her friend at first talked to her about the church, told me after services about how nervous she was. And I literally noticed her legs doing this.
Yeah.
It's hard for her.
Yeah. I think I've told you this story before, maybe once or twice, but I'm not sure if I've told it. Excuse me. But at Beaverton, the church where I grew up attending in Oregon, there was a couple that started coming, and it was the husband who really wanted to come. I think he was an alcoholic, and maybe as part of his AA process, he decided to give church a try, have that kind of spiritual element to his AA. And he started coming to church and was like really engaged and interested and curious. And he said, I got to get my wife. I really want to get my wife. But his wife was she was, close your eyes and imagine Portland. Now open them. That's who she was. Okay? That's who she was. And she came with her husband and said, okay, fine, I'll come. And her mission in going to church that day was to make it so she would never have to go to church again. Now, she had shaved hair, completely shaved hair, nose ring, one of those rings on the nose like that. Very low cut dress right here with a huge tattoo emblazoned across her chest. And she came to church thinking like her whole plan was, I am going to horrify these little Charlie churches, and they will never want me to come back, and that will be the end of that. Instead of being horrified, though, do you know what everybody at church did? Say, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Hey, what's your name? Oh, it's wonderful. We're so glad that you're here today. If you want to go to lunch with us, hey. And we just made her feel welcome. And it was like very disarming for her. Very disarming. And wouldn't you know it, she came back and came back and came back. And both of them did end up getting baptized. And so it just, people come to church or go to a Bible study for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes they're skeptics, sometimes they're enemies, and they want to just come and cause trouble. But for whatever reason, maybe it's like the governor Felix, right? Remember how Felix, he studied with Paul for 2 years. Why did he study with Paul? They wanted a bribe under the table. Maybe grease the wheels a little here, the wheels of Roman justice. And for 2 years he studied with Paul because he wanted a bribe. But did Paul just keep studying? He was literally the captive audience. But he still kept studying. He still kept talking. He didn't care why Felix was there. He was going to disarm him with this message of faith, righteousness, and the judgment to come. Okay, some other specific things, some specific things that we can do. And I've put this out there before, and I want to be clear. I've had a bunch of people who volunteer for this. So I'm not putting this out there in any way as you're not doing a good job with this. We got to run through these real quick. People who will host a Bible study, like that, maybe you're not comfortable teaching a class. And again, a lot of people have already said this. They'll say, hey, Ryan, if you ever have a contact in East Memphis and you need a place to study, just let me know. My home is your home. You come, we'll get a pot of coffee going, and you come study with someone. And so just hosting a Bible study, that's something that people can do. Coming to a Bible study, and Susan's done this before where she's offered, if you ever have a study with a woman, and I'm always very careful about who I study with and in what setting, just for propriety and for my own safety's sake. I'm very careful to study in public places with people, make sure that everybody knows where we're going to be. I text Rebecca and say, hey, I'm going to be with this person at this place, just FYI. But it also helps to have Cindy Hart here when I'm going to have a Bible study. Cindy's amazing because she's here working at the building also. And it means that I can invite someone for a Bible study, and Cindy is here. Cindy knows who's coming, who's going. Susan would go to a Bible study with me if there's ever an opportunity. Like, just being at a Bible study is really good because it helps me in situations where I don't want to compromise myself. And even, remember, even the Apostle Paul, it's not like did all the personal evangelism. He even points out to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, he says, I'm actually glad that I didn't baptize any of you, which means that somebody else was baptizing. Now, who was that? Was it Apollos? Was it, Priscilla and Aquila? I don't know, but he says, I'm glad I wasn't baptizing all of you, which means that somebody else was baptizing other people. It wasn't just Paul. Okay, anything else about that before we move on to probably one more point before we're out of time in class? Anything else you want to throw in?
I would say that it gives those who are evangelized to assurance that it's not just me, there could be someone else in our family that would assure you that we can lead you in the right direction. Like you say, it may take a while, but there's always that assurance that we need to project to them that can be done.
Yeah, that's a good point. And kind of along that same line, I will give you a compliment as a church. Our theme this year has been personal evangelism. Go and preach the word, and we've been pushing it, and we've tried to create opportunities for us to get involved with that, whether it's our Invite a Friend Sunday, the Ladies' Day, meet-up Bible studies, going to the Germantown Festival. We have tried to, craft opportunities for the church to step up and do things, and the church has stepped up and done things. Every time we schedule, and it's not the same people every time, but that's the great thing. That's the great thing about being part of a church family is it doesn't have to be the same 6 people doing all the work all the time. When I study a Bible study or we do that booth at Germantown Fest, it was different people would volunteer for that than volunteer for this thing over here. And we spread out the work evenly among 200 people. If you spread the work out evenly, it means it's not the same 5 or 6 people doing everything all the time. And that's when you get kind of burnout. That's when preachers quit preaching and go and sell running shoes for a living or something. Not that I'm projecting anything. I'm not projecting anything. Let's be clear about that.
Very specific.
Yeah, I know. It's just kind of off the top of my head. Random thing off the top of my head. But you do get that. I have known in the last 10 years, especially accelerated post-COVID, in the last 4 years, I have personally known a lot of preachers who've gotten out of preaching because they said, I'm done. Can't do it anymore. I do all the work. I do everything. No matter what I do, I cannot get people excited. I cannot get them enthusiastic. I schedule Bible studies and nobody shows up. I schedule things in the community and nobody shows up. And that has not been a problem at East Shelby. I'll put it that way. It's just not been a problem. So I appreciate that and I applaud it. And that's what we need to be doing more of. Let's go to this idea here. Somebody read Ephesians 4, verse 16. I know it's out of context. I'm just ripping it out of Ephesians 4. But we want to make a point here about the joints and what they supply. Somebody read Ephesians 4, verse 16 for me.
From whom the whole body joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so it builds itself up in love.
Yeah. A lot to unpack there. That is a really, really dense verse. Obviously, he's pulling in the analogy that he used back in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 about the body, and he's expanded it quite a bit in 1 Corinthians 12 about the different parts of the body. But here in Ephesians 4, he's specifically talking about what do our joints supply? What does every part of the body supply? Everything does something. And it is unique, and it is specialized, and it is important in what it does. And we think, well, we could get rid of the pinky toe or something like that. Have you ever tried to walk without a pinky toe? I know people who've lost their pinky toe, and it takes a long time to get used to walking without a pinky toe. It's amazing what a pinky toe does in terms of just your overall balance. Even the little old pinky toe has some value to it. Even, whatever it happens to be, some small part of your face, some small muscle. When one muscle goes numb, it is amazing the kind of impact that it has on the rest of your body. Every one of us supplies something. And I like the power there in Ephesians 4 that when you are doing what you need to be doing, when you are working as he says, the proper working of each individual part, it'll cause the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. There is a proper working. So here's a balance, and I want to know your thoughts on it. Give me some comment on this. Maybe help me find the balance. There's kind of two different forces here. One of them is God gave you specific talents, so do the talents God gave you. But then the other force is, but God never said you couldn't practice and hone other talents. So how do we balance that? Because I think, here's what happens. Sometimes people will just put themselves in a box and say, well, this is the talent God has given me. I'm a one-talent man, and I'm never going to try anything else because, listen, this is just God's talent that he gave me. And so we sort of limit ourselves and say, like, well, this is my talent, this is all I can do. When maybe if you tried it, or you practiced, or you honed another ability, you might find that, well, you can do more. So how do we balance this, yes, I want to do what God has meant for me to do and be okay with that, but I also want to maybe have an open mind about, maybe there's other talents out there that if I just practice a little bit more, I would be able to use that more. Like, how do you kind of find the balance there?
Pray about it.
Okay, prayer. Okay, that's good. Prayer. And maybe maybe meditate upon it. And I do think meditation is a powerful and underutilized spiritual discipline. Or the more we can practice silence and clearing our mind, I think the more that it allows God's word to wash over us and make a clear statement about the direction we need to be moving in life. So I think meditation and prayer is a powerful thing. Like saying, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing in this church. I don't know what my talents are. God, am I limiting myself? God, do you want me to move bravely into something else that makes me uncomfortable? I know that a lot of people who have not been preachers, maybe they've done another vocation for a long time, and they'll call and ask, and it was like Preston Nichols. That was Preston's situation. Like, literally, his situation was he finished college, he got into banking, and he was doing personal finance at a bank. And he hated it. It was miserable. And he always had in the back of his mind that he wanted to be a preacher, but he just wasn't sure. Do I do this? Do I take the leap? Am I supposed to? Am I going to be good at it? Am I going to be awful at it? And I know he prayed about it a lot before he made the decision to just jump in and be a preacher. And that's a very dramatic example, and not all of us are going to be preachers. But Gina, what you're saying is, pray to God, say, God, if this is something you want me to be doing, a talent I need to be honing, help me to know it. Megan, you have a thought?
I think there's some things that every part of the body is expected to do. Like, in order to stand upright, you use pretty much every part of your body. I mean, with losing my ear recently, it's like, you need your ears to stand up, which is crazy, but you do. So there are some things that's like, okay, every member of the body has to be able to stand up. There's things that we're all expected to do, but then I think there's also, like, specialty things that I think the challenge is, how do we know where that fits in? Is there a database somewhere where, like, this person is good at search engine optimization and this person is good at email marketing? And do we know what skills we have in this church, and how can we communicate better to know that they're being used properly?
That's a great point, okay? So let's talk about a gift, okay? Because this is how I think you find the answer is, we all have certain gifts from God, and maybe I would hear the argument that those gifts are fairly set in stone, okay? Your gifts are your gifts. If you're a 1 talent or 2 talent or 5 talent, like, God does a lot to each of us, a measure of talent. I believe it's Romans 12 that talks about that. By His grace, He allots to us a measure of talent, okay? And maybe the talents themselves are set in stone. But how we use them maybe that's where the creativity needs to come in. And maybe that's where we're limiting ourselves. So let's say your gift is music, okay? You are a musically gifted, musically inclined person. How do you use that gift, though? And maybe we'll get into this a little bit more. Oh, that clock says I have 1 more minute. If you are a musically gifted, are there people who are musically gifted and others who are not? If you have a terrible sense of hearing and you do not have perfect pitch or even close to perfect pitch and your voice is just awful, do you have a talent for music? No. But let's say you do have a talent for music. Figuring out, does that mean song leading? Does that mean song writing? Does that mean getting into publishing, perhaps? I know there are lots of people there who are not great song leaders, but are very talented when it comes to music theory or publishing, and they are very good at writing music. There are 100 different ways that you can use music to serve God, and maybe that's how we need to expand it a little bit more to say, maybe I have a certain set of gifts from God, but maybe I'm not using all those gifts in the most creative and expansive way possible. I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get together on Wednesday night. Thank you, everybody.
Trying to cover pretty well, or still kind of a work in progress? Did you just go to like the clinic there? Like where
I flew through Chicago. Yeah.